Okay, so I will speak for you about a topic very much related with the work just described by Dan about targets and indicators, and I'm really also looking forward for the discussion we will have at the end and about experiences maybe you had in your countries, but also about your views, if this all makes sense or not. So first of all, for me, it's clear we all have goals. Huh? That's the reason we are working for. In a very general way, maybe it's, sorry, oops. It's rather that just conservation, sustainable use of plant genetic resources, or the vision of let's liberate diversity, bring back diversity in our food systems. But if I ask you, I just wonder, do we know if we are on the right track? Do we know if we are going in the right direction or if we are losing every year? Have we today more diversity in our fields compared 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Do we have these figures also to, in a way, monitor and evaluate our work? And here, I think there is maybe some work to be done. And especially if I compare, I would say, with other political sectors, I think it's clear others have quite clear goals also on international level. And it's also clear that clear targets help to initiate policy measures. You see, I think the best example certainly is climate change. Here we have very clear targets for 2050 and how CO2 needs to reduce, which temperature should not be, what should be the level? It's 1.5 degrees or whatever. Just on agriculture in Switzerland, there are also very specific targets. For example, how much nitrate should be reduced and their input into water bodies and so on. In the CBD, we have clear targets for the areas to be protected. The London conference or ozone layers. Here we all had very clear targets which should be achieved, and all these targets have been the starting point to start with measures with the aim to achieve these targets. We all know the best targets are not sufficient, and there is no guarantee, even if we have nice targets, that we will ever reach these goals. That's certainly also evident. Now, my personal experience from Switzerland, for example, we had very clear environmental goals. There is a paper called Environmental Goals for Agriculture, and we have this paper because it said the environmental goals for agriculture serve as a tool for the development of measures. And we have also a goal for agrobiodiversity, which says agriculture makes a significant contribution to the conservation and sustainable use of local varieties of agricultural crops and Swiss breeds. And then, I was very surprised, related to this goal, we have a status report in 2016, and this said the target has been achieved for local varieties. And and I wonder, how do they know? How do they measure it? If we have achieved this target, agriculture makes a significant contribution to the conservation. Because when I then compared the goal on agrobiodiversity with other goals, nitrate, phosphorus, pesticides, they're all, in all other sectors, they have been very precise, quantifiable targets, how much pesticides should be reduced, how phosphorus should be allowed to go into the soil, and so on. But as you see, the target on agrobiodiversity has not been precise at all. And even more surprising, then they just said the target has been reached. Now, we have the same, I would say, problem on the international level. We know there have been the SDG targets, and we have the SDG targets saying that by 2020, we have to maintain the genetic diversity of seeds, cultivated plants, and so on, including through soundly managed and diversified seed And you see, I can't read my, sorry, I can't read my, so manage diversified seed and plant banks at the national, regional, and international level. And according to this, there is one indicator which says number of plant and animal genetic resources for food and agriculture secured in medium or long-term conservation facilities. Switzerland then, as many other states, have prepared some sub-targets on this SDG, which at least says there is a need to conserve and promote domestic genetic diversity. And I think it's very also interesting to read, as it contributes significantly to the conservation sustainable use of local varieties. But the indicator then, again, which has been implemented in Switzerland, is just one indicator. And this says, the indicator shows the number of plant genetic resources accessions in the national database. And they end with the sentence, and an increase in accessions represents sustainable development. For me, I like to put the question on this. As I'm not sure if this is really the best. As you see, this is then the work done by our ministry and the statistics, which shows we have always the same numbers when we look about the accessions in our database. And if this is the indicator to tell us if there is sustainable development regarding agrobiodiversity, sustainable use of plant genetic resources, and so on, I really doubt if this is the best way. But as we just heard, there has been a lot of work done by the Commission on Genetic Resources, and Dan already mentioned these three main targets, which are much more precise and going much further than what has been developed by the CBD in SDG or also in Switzerland on the national level. Right? We have the target on conservation, we have a target on sustainable use, and we have another target on human capacities. Still, these targets are in a way vague. On sustainable use, they say there has been an increased use of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, but still it's clear it has to be an increase. And then there is a long list of indicators. If I'm right, there have been 63 at the beginning, there are now 58. And here just some examples of the indicators with which also the implementation of the global plan of action is measured. So you see, for example, the number of farming communities involved in on-farm management of PGRFA, or the percentage of cultivated land on the farmer varieties, or the number of farmer varieties delivered from national or local gene banks to farmers. And you see other ones, number of crops with active public breeding and so on, or number and programs to increase genetic heterogeneity and crop species and diversity within the agro-ecosystems. I think a lot of these targets are really at the heart of our work and of the member organizations of Let's Liberate Diversity. And therefore we should certainly know about them and maybe also promote them. So as had also been explained by Dan, all these indicators in a way need to be reported also by your government to the Commission. As we heard, the timeline has been now set at the end of the year. I think it was 1 year earlier before, but the nice thing here is you could go to this database and you could double check if your government has already done the homework. I checked it, I think, 2 days ago, and I see, so Italy has done it, I think, quite well. Germany has also sent some information. I think also Switzerland did a good work, especially compared with other countries. But for example, France and Austria, there is nothing. So please go to the website, double check what your country has sent, and maybe it could also be interesting for you to see that they have sent something, but they have never been in touch of you, although maybe you would also have had some information to be shared to fill out these indicators. I just switched this one. Maybe just to mention, there is another initiative also speaking about an indicators, and I at least like very much this graph, which shows maybe 1 point more than we have in the Global Plan of Action and in the indicators by the Commission. As here we have, as we have in the Commission, I would say the conservation of agrobiodiversity. Then we have the sustainable use, but as a third pillar, we have also here agrobiodiversity in markets and consumption. I like quite a lot, I think, this graph, just to have a kind of overview where agrobiodiversity plays a role in the whole life cycle. With this indicator, then they have this healthy diets, as I said, sustainable agriculture, and they always measure the commitment, the action, and the status done by the government, and that they could do some very nice graphs and rankings from Ethiopia to Italy. You see here about the status of agrobiodiversity. They tell us Italy is #1. But as you also see, you see Ethiopia, South Africa, India, Kenya, China, US, they all have quite the same result. So maybe there are also some question marks if all these countries come to the same result at the end. Nevertheless, for me, the main question is what we are doing now. And I would like to, in a way, propose for discussion 2 actions to be taken by stakeholders as also and the members of LLD. The first would be to influence the development of the new indicators on the international level, and maybe also to do some work on national level. So, as you maybe know, in the next months, and the next meeting will be in Geneva in January, and then we will have the COP in Kunming in May. There is the development of the new post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And as we have learned from the past, the IG targets developed in the CBD have then also been taken up by the Sustainable Development Goals and have therefore very much influenced the whole also monitoring and reporting on agrobiodiversity all over the world. And therefore, I think we should be interested about the development of the next targets and the next indicators, especially if they relate to agrobiodiversity. And you see here, target 4, this is a draft, which is now discussed. They say, ensure active management actions to enable the recovery and conservation of species and the genetic diversity of wild and domesticated species, including through ex situ conservation. This is the draft. And in a way, my thoughts and my proposal is, I think it should be our goal to, at the very least, include in this target also in situ and on farm, which is not the case now. But as we have seen from my experience, this then leads that we will only measure the accession in the seed banks at the end. And this will also guide, again, new policy and so on. So for me, this certainly would be a goal to be achieved in the upcoming negotiations. This then would also have an impact when we speak about indicators about this target. So it should not be, as it is now proposed, that we just, again, count the number of plant genetic resources secured in medium and long-term conservation facilities. That's what is in the draft today. And as you see, it's the same as we had for the last 10 years. But I think we should really have an indicator which would be totally in line with the indicators and targets in the Commission of Genetic Resources and in the Global Plan of Action, which is also measuring what is maintained in situ on farm and ex situ in a complementary manner. So this is not any wording coming from somewhere. This would be the wording from the Commission and the Global Plan of Action and the targets and indicators, and in a way align, putting on the same line now the new targets and indicators from the CBD and the ones from FAO. And then there is also another target which speaks about how it should be managed sustainably. All areas under agriculture, aquaculture, and forestry are managed sustainably. So with some good faith, you could say, okay, this speaks about sustainable use, and it's explicitly also mentioned through conservation, sustainable use of biodiversity. Nevertheless, there is so far no indicator on this. And I think to implement it, certainly also some indicator would be very valuable. Then on national level, what we are doing now at the moment in Switzerland is that we had a discussion in a working group called the working group, the Swiss Commission for the Conservation of Cultivated Plants, SCEC, Schweizerische Kommission für die Erhaltung von Kulturpflanzen. ProSpecieRara is a member there, and there is now the goal and the aim to develop own targets and indicators for plant genetic resources, conservation, sustainable use, human capacities for Switzerland. We are also collaborating with representatives from our government. We learn also from their experiences when they had to report for the Global Plan of Action, so the indicators and targets I mentioned before. So there is a learning, but I think we now used these FAO indicators as a starting point to work on our own indicators. And we have a first draft, which is now shared with members of this commission and with other experts, and we hope to finalize this list of targets and indicators by the end of this year. And hopefully, it's a hope, but that we start the data collection next year. There will certainly be still a lot of learnings coming back and forth, but it's really our belief that when we know better what we really want and when we know better the status and the discrepancies, then we have also a good tool in our hands to ask for new policy measures and maybe also have an influence when, for example, Switzerland is further developing the biodiversity strategy or the environmental goals. If we have this homework done, I think we would be in a better position to also influence these policy developments. That's from my part. So I'm really looking forward for the discussion if you think this makes sense or if you think this makes no sense, and what's also maybe your experiences related to this topic. Thank you very much.